Every year, whales along the north coast draw tourists and locals to the waterfront to try and catch a glimpse. Witnessing them wild in their habitat can be a humbling experience. But with increasing industry in the area, one expert says we're all swimming a fine line now. Chris Picard is a marine biologist for the Gitga'at First Nation in Hartley Bay. He specializes in humpback and killer whales, and he'll be giving a talk on his research tonight in Prince Rupert. Carolina spoke to him earlier in our Prince Rupert studio, and she started by asking Chris about the whale sightings he's seen so far this spring.
This is the time of year when whales are starting to arrive in the Hartley Bay area. The humpback whales are arriving from their breeding grounds in Hawaii, and the killer whales are starting to arrive either following marine mammals who are following some of the fish populations in towards the inlets areas around Hartley Bay, or following salmon, depending on the type of killer whale that we are seeing. We actually do see both types. We see transient killer whales, which are the kinds that prey on marine mammals, and we also see the residents, which are essentially fish eaters, and a lot of their prey is focused on salmon.
There was great excitement down in the harbor the other day when there had been, I guess, a pod of killer whales that had passed by. Locals love to catch a glimpse of whales. So do tourists. They come all the way here for it. I'm interested to know, as an observer, what do you see that other people don't, who are just catching a glimpse of them in the water? What are you looking for?
Well, it's really interesting to see their behavior. A lot of our work has certainly focused on humpback whales. We do have very good killer whale encounters too, but it's really interesting to see the humpback whale behavior. One, their feeding behavior, the types of prey that they are targeting seems to not always be consistent. Sometimes they're targeting plankton, and we know that because we actually see their waste products, their feces on the water sometimes. Or if they're targeting fish, when they are feeding, you see the actual fish jumping from the water, essentially leaping for their lives away from these large gaping mouths.
Now, recently we've been hearing about plans to build a pipeline out to Kitimat, a port there as well, which reasonably would suggest tankers moving through that sound. What does that mean? What sort of concerns does that pose?
Well, the people of Hartley Bay, and I think a lot of other people are definitely worried about the prospect of tankers traveling through that area for a number of reasons. As it relates to whales, well, certainly large tankers introduce a risk of some large-scale oil spills, and certainly the evidence that we've seen from the Exxon Valdez, which is probably the most studied oil spill in the whole world, certainly suggests that oil spills do have pretty major and long-term impacts on whales. Essentially, whales, if they're in the area of an oil spill and in the vicinity, in the case of the Exxon Valdez, were found to have either inhaled or ingested oil or consumed contaminated prey. And there seemed to be and there was a very high mortality rate of killer whales in that case following that spill. And in fact, the populations of killer whales in the Exxon Valdez are still in the recovery phase. They have not fully recovered to what they were before the spill. So there are some definite concerns associated with oil spills and whales.
You were mentioning earlier about whales migrating all the way from Hawaii up here. With the whales spanning such a large geographical area, how can the species be preserved if not everybody is on the same page? If there's tanker traffic or oil development, offshore oil development in the States or anywhere else, why does it matter to be looking at it here?
Well, why it matters to be looking at it here, I guess I'll answer that question in a couple of ways. Well, why it matters to be looking at it here off the BC coast is because, as I was discussing earlier, the evidence that has been collected so far regarding humpback whales in BC suggests that there are a few spots that seem to be very high value, very important habitat for whales. But those interior inlets and those channels in and around the Hartley Bay area, which directly intersect with the shipping routes that tankers currently and future tankers would take to the port of Kitimat. But you're absolutely right. A species that has such a large-scale oceanic migration needs to have, or its conservation needs coordinated and international efforts as well.
Are you worried about the future of whales in the area?
I certainly am worried. As there's more and more boats on the water, there can be more and more disturbance to whales beyond just oil spills. Certainly, as we get more vessels, both small fishing vessels, and the large-scale industrial vessels. And so, while when increase in economic development needs to be considered, it also needs to be considered in the context of the overall ecology of the area, but also the overall economic visions and plans that people on the coast have. And so certainly ecotourism, aquaculture are a big part of that. And so we just have to make sure that industrial developments that do come to the coast, that those type of developments are compatible with the type of sustainable economic pursuits that the Gitga'at Nation and other people who are currently on the coast have an interest in.
Chris, thanks very much for coming by today.
Thank you, Carolina.
That was Gitga'at First Nation marine biologist Chris Picard. He'll be speaking tonight on the status of whales at a World Wildlife Federation event in Prince Rupert.